Airbags. Are you used to that little pesky light facing you that says airbag? Is that a problem? Is the thing going to blow up in your face? What do we do with that airbag light?
Well, we don't ignore it. That's one thing, Dave. You don't want it to ignore it. It's certainly not going to make you break down, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions about airbags and the history of airbags that people don't even really know, and I was quite surprised today in this week doing a little bit more of our research. 1950s was the first patent for an airbag. Some guy. I don't remember
There's no way they could have had airbags in the 50s.
Well, maybe they got the patent. They were certainly thinking about it.
Right. Well, the early ones were operated off of compressed air. That was the early version.
So I don't know whether they have this big giant welding tank in the car. That was probably its own danger of compressed air to blow up this airbag. But they certainly were too slow and probably very rudimentary.
Well, I think the first production one to come out was a 1971 Oldsmobile Tornado had an airbag in it.
Well, and I didn't even realize it was the option. They weren't uncommon in the 70s in cars, or maybe they were uncommon, but it wouldn't be uncommon to find one. It was probably an option that a lot of people didn't want to pay for. Probably some of them leaked out of the proving grounds.
Well, they've come a long ways, and 1973 Impala had airbags.
Yeah.
Some other Oldsmobile models had airbags. I didn't know they went back that far. I thought it was like a mid-'80s thing, you know.
That's kind of what I thought, too. But, I used to work at a Chevron station that's no longer at Miller and Indian School. And I have a recollection of an accident there in the intersection. This would have been the early 90s. And there's this collision. It's an older car. We're going, what is all that stuff inside the car? What is this, like, smoke? And it was a late 70s car or mid-70s, and it had an airbag in it. Everybody was shocked to see that. But then it wasn't until 1998 that they're mandatory dual airbags.
1998 was passenger car, and 99 was trucks.
I think, or 97, followed by a year, yeah. And then now it's not just dual airbags. I mean, you've got curtain airbags, you've got door airbags, you've got airbags in your seats, you've got
airbags in the seatbelt. What's that all about?
Well, it's the pretension in the airbag. Oh, there is an airbag in the seatbelt. You're right. It blows up the little deal. I thought you were talking about the pretensioner. My Toyota truck. I have a 2010 Toyota truck. There's an airbag down by your knees to protect your knees. So I bet your higher end models, your BMWs, your Lexus, probably have. I think they could have 10 or 12 airbags. I'm not sure of the count.
Well, so you are driving in your car and that airbag light is on. Are you thinking the worst? This is going to be a big deal. I'm going to have to go get my airbags fixed. What are some of the common things, Matt? Those airbag systems are they're very involved. So there's an airbag control module that is testing the system. I read on GM's it's testing as much as 10 times per second. It's pinging all the little members out there, whether that be the deceleration sensor in the bumper or the impact sensor in the bumper, whether that be the occupant sensor in the seat, a seatbelt is your seatbelt on. All those things are being tested.
Well, yeah, but part of the evolution, first you had your basic airbags. We're talking modern era, and they describe modern era as 80s. So you had this airbag that kaboom, that thing just blasted no matter what. And then you got a passenger airbag, and kaboom, that thing blasted no matter what. And now there's different generations. They're slowing them down with the technology. They don't deploy as hard. So if you've got a 400-pound person sitting in the front seat, that's going to deploy differently through using a occupant sensor or a scale in the seat. Then it's going to deploy probably much harder than it would be if there's an 80-pound person sitting in that seat. Or probably where the insurance companies got really involved.
It's expensive when those things go off.
It's not going to blow at all if nobody's sitting in the seat. No sense in blowing off the passenger side airbag if you're the only one in the car.
Well, I know. So I put my laptop on the passenger seat of my Honda Element. The light on the dashboard says passenger airbag off.
It probably says it even with your computer not on there. But I bet if you put a 50-pound backpack in there,
it feels more like a kid.
Yeah, or something heavy.
Well, I remember in the early days, like the 1998 Dodge truck had a little key right there. You would turn off the passenger airbag because there was a lot of liability to it. If you put a kid in that seat, it was totally dangerous. And so all that's gone away because now it's a smart airbag system. So back to my question, the light is on. What am I going to do?
Well, the one thing to think is the majority of the time there's absolutely nothing wrong with the airbag. It's the airbag system. There's some common failures. And a lot of people are like, oh, my God, this airbag light's on. That's going to be expensive. No, really, it's probably not. Not more expensive than your face being blasted with glass from the windshield because it didn't work. But
Well, when the airbag light is on, chances are it's just disabled the system, at least some component of the system. So depending on which part of the system's not right is probably going to be the component that's disabled. So if it's something maybe in relation to the passenger seat, maybe that component is not working.
yeah, or the passenger seat bag might work. But the question, so one common thing we see on Hondas, the seatbelt switch, that's part of the airbag system. It needs to know you have your seatbelt on. If your seatbelt's not on, it's going to deploy the airbag differently than it would if your seatbelt is on. If it's not recognizing that that circuit at least is capable of working, well, in most cases, Honda, that's a lifetime warranty on the seatbelt system. That cures your airbag problem for nothing.
Right. Now, Honda does lifetime warranty on their seatbelt, but no one does a lifetime warranty on airbags.
No lifetime warranty on the airbag, but the seatbelt system can affect the airbag. BMWs use a sensor in the seat, basically a scale.
Gyro sensor or
No, just an occupant sensor.
Right.
There's a switch. You put your butt in the seat, it turns the switch on. Well, if it's not recognizing the ability of that switch to work, it's going to turn on the airbag light. You're not replacing a $2,000 airbag. You're just replacing an occupant sensor that, it's a couple $100. $100 to figure it out, $100 for the part, maybe $100 to do it. I don't know. Just it's not that bad.
It is a huge safety feature, and the National Highway Safety Administration has got 30 years worth of data now on airbags. And when they originally came out, people were like, I don't know about that thing going off in my face. Well, the data proves that it is definitely a good thing. That's why it's mandatory. So if you got the light on, you want to have it checked out. You don't want to ignore it. You got a safety feature that is missing, and the cars are designed to have an airbag in them. So it's a major component that's not happening.
Well, and the other thing too is not only is the light on, that's a problem. If you don't have a light, we talk about the check engine light, the ABS light, some of the other lights. The system is going to do a self-test every time you turn the key on. The airbag light, which may say airbag or SRS, supplemental restraint system, when you turn the key on, that light's going to come on for about a second and a half while it does a self-test, and then it should go off. If you don't see that light on, problem.
Well, that's a huge deal when you're looking to buy a car. We always say do the bulb check. Turn the key forward, and all the lights on the dashboard should come on. You should see an airbag light. You should see a brake light. You should see a check engine light. If you don't see an airbag light, that's one of the scams that really goes out there is when a car is wrecked, maybe it's not totaled out by the insurance company per se, and it's got a good title. Well, maybe somebody tries to repair that and get it back on the road.
Well, and we've talked.
They just leave the airbag out altogether. The safety feature is gone. So you got to see that light come on.
Well, and we've talked in shows past with the Attorney General prosecuting people for selling these counterfeit airbags. But just as well, I've seen airbags, like the steering wheel portion of the airbag, where it just doesn't say SRS on it anymore or airbag, and it's just a replacement horn button is all it is. And they turn the airbag light off, but it's hard. It's not made to feel, or it's not misrepresented necessarily as an airbag, but it's just something as a placeholder so it looks normal.
Up first this segment, we're going to go with Teresa on a 2009 PT Cruiser. Go ahead, Teresa. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Well, you guys, thank you for talking about this issue because I have the little signal, the airbag, and it just lights up from time to time. And so I looked it up in the internet, and one guy was saying that there's two sensors, one in the seatbelt and one somewhere in the engine.
Well, there's more than two sensors, but internet we say is dangerous sometimes. But go back. This brings us back to our intermittent problems.
Right, it comes
show
on,
we
comes
did
off
a little while ago. But when that comes on, it's going to set a code in the airbag or the restraint system.
Uh-huh.
And the Chrysler products are pretty common. One of the things that we didn't mention, besides the seatbelt switches and the decelerometers or the yaw sensors that are in the car, is a part called a clock spring. And everybody says, "What's a clock spring what's a clock got to do with my airbag?"
Yeah, you really lost it now.
And the common thing on the PT Cruisers we see quite a bit, and I'm not saying this is the problem, but somebody needs to look at it, is there's a spool basically of wire, because you've got that steering wheel's turning, and that's got to stay electronically connected to the controller. So there's a spool of wire in there, and it's just like a paper clip. It can only bend so many times before wires start breaking. So we see common failures there. Now, I don't think your car has steering wheel controls like volume or radio or cruise control. Many of those do multiplexing, and they come through the same wires. So we'll see sometimes the airbag light is on. It's got a clock spring, or we suspect a clock spring, and we confirm it by saying, oh, look here, the volume control doesn't work either. All that's going through that clock spring, not just the airbag.
So, Teresa, your next step is really to get this to a shop, to get it diagnosed. It may not be a major deal, and that's the thing that we see most people are afraid of. It's going to be some big, expensive repair. It may not be, and what they're going to do, the nice thing is anytime those lights come on, whether it be a check engine light or an airbag light, there's going to be a diagnostic trouble code stored in the airbag module. Now, I don't believe that the guy at Acme Auto Parts can scan the airbag module. I think it's going to be a little nicer scanner that's going to go there to find out what's going on. But there's going to be a diagnostic trouble code, and that's a starting place for the shop, and then that's going to point them in the direction. Because as Matt said, there's more than just two sensors. There's a lot of things going on that can turn that light on, but they're going to need to hone in on that and see what that is. So thanks for the call, Teresa. We're going to go with Terry in Apache Junction on a 1992 Chevrolet 1500. Go ahed, Terry. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Yes, certainly enjoy your show. Yes, I have a 1992 Chevy pickup. It's a long bed, 1500. It's a four-wheel drive, and it's a CK series. It's got about 99,400 miles on it, and it's not used very much. The last couple of days, we've been hauling rock to and from the house, which is a round trip about half a mile, 2 times a day. Drove in second gear when loaded with the rock, and when it wasn't with the rock, I'd drive with just drive. I noticed that my coolant was dripping out of near the cap, and further noticed that my coolant reservoir was much fuller than normal. When I opened the coolant reservoir today, it had a pink color and was heavy in weight compared to water. The transmission has a leak, or the transmission had less than minimum level on it. And I guess my questions are, do I have a serious problem? Do I dare drive this without causing more problems? And is this going to be an expensive repair/replace? I might add that I don't drive this very much, and it usually sits in the garage about 4 to 5 months of the year when we're out traveling around. And when that sits there, I have a pan underneath it, and it collects about 1 quart, approximately a quart of transmission fluid.
Okay. I think what we've got going on is it's an automatic transmission. I think even you said you had in second, maybe you're pulling the manual lever into second because you had a bigger load in the vehicle, and that makes sense if you're at slower speeds. Now, inside that radiator, there is integral to it. There's a transmission cooler. So the radiator cools two things. It cools the engine coolant for the engine. So you've got radiator fluid in there, engine coolant, and then you've got transmission fluid in there in a little separate compartment down generally in the bottom of the radiator and the side of the radiator. So they share the radiator, and what can happen is that wall of separation between the transmission side and between the engine coolant side can break. So
it's just a tube.
It's really a
coil.
A tube, but there's a sealing portion to it. It's got to be sealed. So what happens is the transmission fluid can get over into the radiator, and it sounds like that's what happened, and really the opposite is true. So the radiator fluid can get back into the transmission. It can be an expensive repair if the radiator fluid did get into the transmission. You'd rather go the other way, but generally it happens both. So it could be a bad situation. So it sounds like you've got a radiator issue. It can cause transmission leaks because the transmission may at some points be over full because it's got coolant in it. So that's what I think is going on. So
yeah, I mean, clearly you need to have a radiator replaced. I mean, or at least most clearly it sounds like the radiator is bad. And if that glycol, like Dave said, gets into the transmission fluid, the glycol delaminates the clutches and does crazy things inside the transmission. You might get away with it for a while. Maybe you can get away with just replacing the radiator, flushing the coolant out, and then keep your fingers crossed on the transmission.
And almost never does that work. I mean, you can try it, but what happens when you get moisture in the transmission, it gets underneath the clutches, and then when the clutch is applied, it steams and breaks. It just delaminates the clutch right from it. So very common problem. Volvos are a big issue with that. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So a lot of times when someone comes in for a Volvo transmission service, we just run an alternate transmission cooler so it never happens to them because it's an expensive repair. Up first this segment, let's go with Dennis in Fountain Hills on a 2003 Honda Civic. Go ahead, Dennis. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Morning, you guys. Yeah, I got a issue with it overheating. I basically had the one of the lines that went to the throttle body. It had a pinhole in, so I replaced it. And then driving it, I noticed that the temperature would just go up. The icon that shows the the thermostat?
Yeah, a little picture of a
area.
Uh-huh.
I noticed it was going up above that, but it wasn't going really that high. So I'd flip the heater on, and then no heat came out, because usually once I know temperature is going up, I'll turn the heater on so I can get it to drop. But then it wasn't blowing anything out. So when I got it stopped and popped the cap, just turning it a little bit, I noticed that no fluid came out of it. So I put in probably, I don't know, not too much coolant in it. But then it still didn't work. And then I got the air bubbles out of the system.
That's what I was going to ask you. How did you get the air bubbles out?
What was that?
How did you get the air bubbles out?
I basically just drove it, and then I parked it in a spot where it was head down, and then popped the cap again and let the bubbles out, and then I tipped it, drove again, and had it in an upright position, and then I got a big air bubble popped out of it.
Okay.
And then filled it up. But I noticed my fan wasn't coming on either, so I knew the fan switch had to be bad. I jumpered the wires, and it came on. And both fans come on with the AC switch. The fan's coming on now with the new fan switch when it's hot. But I'm still getting it rising when I'm like 65, 70 on the freeway,
now,
and then when I back off.
Did you have any problems with this before the throttle body hose blew? No symptoms of overheating before that?
No,
okay.
None.
Well, I suspect still, even though you think you've done a good job of getting the air out of the system, and you may have, you said head down. That means butt up.
Right.
So that's going the wrong way.
The wrong way, right.
If you can get the front wheels up off the ground, that would be one way to help burp the car. And I don't know where it is on that Honda Civic, but I am almost confident there is a bleeder valve. It almost looks like a brake bleeder screw. It's going to be near the side of the cylinder head where one of the radiator hoses, or the upper hose or lower hose, wherever the thermostat housing typically is, and you need to burp that out. You probably didn't get all the air, but you did a good test. Turning the air conditioner on, both fans come on. You know the circuit's good. You know that the fans are working. I suspect you still have air in the system, so look closely for that air bleed screw and get it out that way. And again, you've got to be super careful, not while it's hot.
And this is pretty common when people do a lot of repairs. In later model cars, what's happened is the hood line has come down so much, so now the radiator is below the top of the engine and the head. So bleeding the air out of the system is difficult, and a lot of these cars were vacuum filling the coolant system. We have that advantage in that tool, but in your driveway, what are you going to do? And I like the idea of getting the car way up. And then also find that bleeder screw. I remember in the old straight six Jeeps, the 4 liters, it was hard to get them bled out, so we would fill them through the heater hose,
right?
Because that was up nice and high, and that was the best way to get the air bubble out.
Yeah, and that vacuum tool is something we use in our shop. You just can't. It's almost it's just mandatory. You have to have it, and that's sucking the vacuum on the system and then using the vacuum to draw the coolant back into the car. So I'm sure you still have an air pocket issue. But thanks for the call. Good question.
So we're going to go with Ron in Mesa on a 2012 Honda CRV. Go ahead, Ron. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
All right. Thanks for taking my call. A little bit of history. I had a 1994 Accord that I got rid of, where I changed the oil religiously every 3,000 miles. Now I've got this 2012 CRV, and there's no maintenance schedule for the oil change. It says to go by the computer. And I haven't driven it much. I got 5,000 miles on it now, and it still says that the oil life is at 50%, which at 5,000 miles just goes against my grain. Do you trust those computers on checking the viscosity, or should I change it every 5?
I don't believe it checks viscosity. I think it's just a program that looks at average vehicle or temperatures, outside temperatures, how hard, how much throttle position you generally use. It's just a calculated estimator.
There's a map programmed in there that some engineers figured out, and it takes into consideration all that stuff that Dave said: drive time, temperature, acceleration, just all those factors. It absolutely goes against my grain, and I would bet the oil is probably okay. And even on a 2012 Honda, you don't need to have somebody looking at the car all the time. My suggestion would be do it every 5,000 miles.
I got a 2011 Honda Element, and I can get that thing up to using up all the oil life after 3,000 miles just because I'm a heavy foot.
Because you drive like,
I drive at full throttle or no throttle. That's the only way I do it. So if you drive easy on it, it may go a long time, but I just don't.
I get this question all the time in the shop, and I tell people, I forget the light. That's one of the times where I will say ignore the light, or because that thing's going to come on out of life cycle a little bit. You can always reset it. But what I would do, make sure you're using a good oil. That car probably calls for some type of synthetic or synthetic blend. I'm like the numbers, 5,000. Then you know you're doing it 10,000. And just do it now. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, so on. You don't even really need a sticker on the window at that point. Just follow that. I view it as a little bit of insurance.
Yeah.
Over the life of the car, you're going to do 5 or 6 more oil changes.
The car's not going to complain because you put too good of oil in it and too often. It's going to love every bit of it. So let's go with Mary in Scottsdale on a 2001 Lexus. Go ahead, Mary. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
I have an aerial that hasn't gone down in a long time, and it won't go down. So it's on the right side of the car, and I can hear a motor going sometimes, like it wants to go down, but it doesn't go down. So consequently, I can't go to the drive-in car wash.
Well, that's pretty easy one even for us over the phone to diagnose. And there's a antenna mast in there, and that what you're hearing is there's a worm gear. There's a plastic piece inside that metal antenna with a gear.
Can you make that noise?
Me?
Make the noise.
Something like that. Yeah.
But it's smoother and more mellow than that.
Well, Matt's abrupt, just his personality. He sounds sweet on air, but he is really rough.
But but what's happening? There's a larger gear in there that just wants to walk that long. It's a piece of it's just a long tube. It's 6 feet long, or the length of the antenna, and then some. And it winds it up, and it's got to curl up like a little pigtail. So just like the paperclip, after doing that so many times, it breaks. So you probably don't need to have the whole antenna replaced, the whole assembly, the electronic portion. We can do what's called replacing the mast. Problem is sometimes it's really easy to do for somebody that knows what they're doing, but it's not that difficult. But the problem is part of that plastic tape, if you will, or the geared portion gets stuck down inside the body of the motor. So sometimes you have to take that off and retrieve some of the junk out of there. But it's not a big deal. It's something that most shops can fix. Really easy. And then guess what? Then you can start washing your car again. So not a big deal.
Well, we are going to go to Gary in Mesa on a 2001 Honda Santa Fe. Go ahead, Gary. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hello. Yeah, I bought a 2001 model at the auction last weekend, and when I was driving it home, I noticed that it had a hum coming from the rear end, like possibly a bad wheel bearing, or maybe even broken tooth in the differential. And I'm trying real hard to isolate the problem right now. Since it has rear independent suspension, it has quite a few bearings that could be causing
Did you
the problem.
say, is this all-wheel drive, Gary?
Yes, it is.
It is all-wheel drive. So we've got the quickest thing to check for hub bearings is going to be the swerve test. Okay, so you're driving down the road 45, 50 miles an hour. If you swerve the car, and
It's a little fast, Dave.
my wife's car, and she's sitting here, man, she had the weird wheel bearing we just could not find, man. We kept replacing the wrong one.
A little bit of my semantics again is a Hyundai, not a Honda.
I said Hyundai.
No, you said Honda.
Yeah, you're all over my stuff today. So anyway, 45 to 50 miles an hour. Matt is not as good a technician, so he tends to go slower, and that's just a thing about speed. So 45 to 50 miles an hour, just swerve the vehicle to the left, bank to the left a little bit, bank to the right a little bit, and see if the noise, if it gets louder, well, it's going to be a right side bearing.
Well, if you go to the right, it's going to load the left, and therefore it'd be the left bearing. If it gets, it's the opposite of the way you're turning.
Man, you just totally turned me around.
Yeah.
Bank left, turn left, and if it gets louder, it's going to be a right side bearing.
Whatever. Now you're making me think.
Bank right.
It's
so
the opposite.
That is going to be the most common. Is going to be their hubs. They're not serviceable bearings like you remember the old cone style bearings, but they're an assembly. And anymore they have an ABS sensor in them too. So that's going to be the most common. I know I've got a Santa Fe 01 Santa Fe in my shop right now where the transfer case went bad. So these transfer cases on these front wheel drive cars are primarily a front-wheel drive car with a drive shaft that goes to the back. They call it an angle gear, is another name for it. They hold like a quart and a half of fluid, so that it's real easy for them to run out of fluid, and we do see those things fail when they develop a small leak. So go look in there.
And that tone won't change with the slight left to right swerve. If you can change the tone or influence it with the slight swerve, you're heading down the road to a wheel bearing. If it doesn't change at all, something that's in common,
differential bearings. You got a carrier bearing on the drive shaft on that thing. Those pretty common, so I'd be looking there.
But if it had a broken gear, that would be a much worse. You wouldn't have some subtle.
You don't squeal that much, and I think you got a loose screw. So anyway, we had an email this week from Erica, and she.
You were talking to me, right?
I was talking to you.
I just want to make that clear.
We had an email from Erica, and she said, "What is the single most important thing I can do to get my car ready for summer? Triple-digit temperatures. I think they're happening this week. So what's the most single important thing she can do? Is that a radiator? Is that a fan belt? Is that an oil change? What should she be doing?"
Keeping up with your regular maintenance and going to your regular shop that you have a relationship. And then after somebody's looked at the car, let them decide if there's even anything you need to do. But there's no single repair that you need to do. That's going to depend on the car, the mileage, the situation, how you use the car. It's the continued theme is have your regular relationship and keep good maintenance on the car is the most important thing year round.
Well, and the other point, and we'll go to break, is that a full inspection. April's Car Care Month. All the bumper-to-bumper shops are doing inspections. Get a good inspection, a thorough inspection. That will tell you what needs to happen. Up for this segment, we've got Ann in Phoenix on a 2003 F350. Go ahead, Ann. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi. I'm embarrassed to even say that I have this truck. I have the dreaded 6.0-liter diesel, and I am having this really strange problem that my mechanics, I've got two really good mechanics that work with this truck, they cannot find the source of it. Down by my gas pedal, my foot is getting hot, and we have gone through a whole bunch of things to try to resolve it. Nothing has resolved it. Of course, we looked for the exhaust leak first. Maybe it was coming through the firewall. We didn't find that, and then we repaired a series of problems. Have you heard of this before?
I haven't. What is hot? Is it just like hot to your feel? You like feel is it heat you feel radiating from the floorboard? Is it something blowing on your foot?
It's not blowing, and I've done some temperature gun readings, and I can't get too much higher than 145 down there. And if I go past the insulation and touch the metal, it's very, very hot. But it's on my foot. It's just like sometimes it'll get really hot, and it feels like my foot's burning.
I'm thinking Dr. Sam in neurology is what I'm thinking.
I know. I talked to my mechanic about that, and I'm like, maybe I need to see a psychiatrist.
I wasn't thinking so much of that, just false feelings coming from one of your limbs.
It's interesting. I'm a delivery driver, so I live in this truck, and I've got two other trucks, and I don't experience any other trucks. So I'm reluctant to think I'm crazy. So.
Well, that might be the case, but
that wasn't very nice, Matt.
Well, she said it, but
I've never
maybe
heard of it.
It's not. I don't know. Maybe it's not actually blowing out, like the fan's not blowing the air out, but maybe there's still something wrong with the heater or a vent door that's stuck open, so there's some hot air coming out, but it's just not physically blowing out. But then you said the floorboard is hot. I would imagine there's got to be a heat shield missing or
heat shield down there.
Something, but
I don't know. If you send us an email at bumpertobumperradio.com, I'll run it through the problem database, see if anyone's had that issue.
The easiest thing, I think, sometimes you just don't know what's supposed to be there in its absence. If there's a shield missing and you're not quite sure what it looks supposed to look like. If you have an identical truck, a couple quick visuals, but man, that's a weird one. You can be like a race car driver and go get one of those thermal boots put on, like the NASCAR drivers are probably using tonight at Richmond or somewhere. And
Matt wears a driving suit even to drive to work. You should see him. He's kind of weird that way. So today is Lady Driving Diesel Day. So we've got Helen in Glendale. No, not Helen, but Loretta in Phoenix on a 1999 Dodge 2500 diesel. Go ahead, Loretta. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi. Thank you for your help. My truck was in an accident, and it was hit on the left front side. And when I took it in for an oil change, my mechanic noticed that the fan blades were bent, and so we called the repair shop that had done the body work, and they told me to drive it down there. Well, by the time I got it down there, it had done some damage to my radiator, which wasn't damaged prior to that. And so I'm concerned now that listening to your show, do I need to worry about my transmission? Because when they did the oil change, they also had to add transmission fluid, which is unusual.
Well, when you change out that transmission or that radiator, Dave, may not have the transmission oil cooler in it.
It has both. It has an auxiliary air cooler, and then it has a cooler in the radiator. And I don't think necessarily need to be concerned. It's not real common on a Dodge for that wall of separation between engine coolant and transmission fluid to break. But it's certainly, if it's something you're concerned about, a lot of shops carry glycol test kits, and we can glycol test the transmission fluid to make sure that that has not happened.
Okay, now should I take it back to the dealership then that did the work on the replacing the fan?
How long ago was it between the time you got in the accident and the time you noticed the fan blades were bent?
Well, I didn't get my truck back until the first week of March, and this happened last week with the noticing the fan blades being bent. However, I noticed that my truck wasn't running like it usually does when for that period of time.
You might have been getting a harmonic vibration from the fan blades being bent. And did you say they did replace the radiator as well?
Yes, they last week they replaced the radiator, the fan, of course, and I have pictures of it. I told them to take pictures because they're saying, well, it can't be related to the accident, and I'm going, man, it was a bad accident.
Well, it sounds like maybe there was just an oversight when they replaced the radiator and didn't top off the transmission fluid. Because you're going to lose, how much cooler capacity? Half a quart?
So one thing that does happen, and that's the first thing we look for when we see a transmission that's low when it comes to our shop and we're diagnosing it. When it's low on fluid and there's no fluid leaking, we look at the radiator. Has the radiator just been replaced? Because what happens, and it can lose more than a quart or two, when the radiator gets pulled out, we disconnect the transmission cooler lines from the radiator, and if you let those sit and they're kind of angled down toward the ground, I mean, I've seen 3-4 quarts come out of there. So that's one of the things we look at. So we want to make sure the transmission's full. Now, on a Dodge truck like that, when you check the transmission fluid, and this is the one that everyone gets wrong, you have to check it in neutral. If you don't check it in neutral, it will show that it's full when it could very well be 2 quarts low. And that's typical all rear-wheel drive Dodge vehicles.
Well, it might be worth a trip to Tri-City Transmission to have a transmission test done, look and see if there's another leak besides that. They can do the glycol test. It's worth the drive out there, set the appointment, and see. If not, Dave's Car Care in Peoria, 51st Avenue in Peoria, they can inspect the transmission, see if there's any leaks, see if it's due for a service or anything like that. But it's probably worth the trip to the transmission shop just for that portion of it, and that will give you the peace of mind as well.
Well, now, and the other thing I want to make point here just toward the end of the show is that, it is triple digits coming, and it is something that if you can get your car in now versus being stuck on the side of the road come the middle, July, isn't that someplace you want to be?
Well, yeah, I did a deal for Channel 3 News last night, and my point was that we don't see our regular customers at my shop getting towed in because they don't break down. Because we're doing the maintenance and we're doing the preventative measures to ensure that they break down. You don't want to be on the side of the road or in a parking lot with some battery salesman trying to cram a battery down your throat and having to be forced to make that decision. You don't want to be struggling to get a radiator hose put on. Get ahead of it. It doesn't mean you have to go spend a bunch of money. Maybe at some point you will, but at least know what you're faced with going into the summer. Get the list.
Right.
And talk about it and come up with a plan and do all this stuff and be proactive so you're not reacting in the parking lot or on the side of the road and making bad decisions.